If you ever hear armor breathing, don't ignore it. The hangar was 200 feet wide and cold as a meat locker, the air humming at a steady 60 hertz from the docking clamps overhead. Ethan Cole stood alone beneath a suspended exoframe that wasn't supposed to be alive. He made $18 an hour plus hazard pay, wore a grease-stained EarthGov patch on his shoulder, and kept his head down on Imperial contracts. The armor in front of him was nearly 7 feet tall, forged in overlapping plates of silver-blue alloy that caught the fluorescent lights and fractured them into pale halos. It should have been inert. Instead, a faint vibration traveled through his wrench and into his wrist. A pulse. Slow. Measured. Waiting. He glanced at the warning glyphs scrolling across the diagnostic panel. Royal property. Do not alter core structure. He exhaled through his teeth. The chest plate had been removed and set on a magnetic cradle. Inside, braided filaments, organic and metallic, ran along a spinal lattice no thicker than a ruler. One strand flickered, dimming every few seconds like a failing bulb. You're not scrap, he muttered, leaning closer. The readout showed internal temperature dropping below optimal range, 91 degrees Fahrenheit, and falling. Whoever wore this would feel it. He shouldn't care. He was here to replace scorched plating, tighten servo joints, log the repair, and clock out. That was the contract. But the pulse stumbled again, and something about the rhythm felt stubborn, like a heart refusing to quit. Ethan set down the standard-issue toolkit and reached for his own case, the one he'd paid for back in Ohio before Earth ever signed treaties with empires. He bypassed the factory schematic and rerouted a microconduit, shaving a fraction of an inch off a warped bracket so the lattice could sit without strain. The metal resisted at first, singing under the rotary file, then settled. He worked in silence except for the soft rasp of contact and the distant thrum of engines cycling outside the bay. Sweat gathered under his collar despite the chill. 42 minutes later, he sealed the conduit with a polymer weave designed for agricultural drones, not royal armor. It fit better. The pulse steadied. Stronger now. He didn't smile. He just tightened the final bolt to 12 foot-pounds and stepped back. The armor no longer looked like a relic from a war museum. It looked balanced. Footsteps echoed across the hangar, measured, unhurried, each one landing with quiet authority. Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth and turned as a tall figure entered beneath the white lights, silhouette framed in silver. Violet eyes regarded the suspended frame, then shifted to him. The air felt thinner. Who authorized this repair? The figure asked, voice smooth as cooled steel. Ethan swallowed once, then met the gaze. It was failing at the spine, he said. I fixed it. The pulse inside the armor answered for him, steady, alive. The hangar did not echo after she spoke. It absorbed the sound, as if the metal itself understood rank. Ethan kept his hands visible at his sides, grease still dark along the lines of his knuckles. Up close, the figure was taller than he first thought, nearly 7 feet, shoulders framed in a mantle of pale alloy that moved like liquid when she breathed. The violet in her eyes was not bright. It was controlled, measured. She stepped past him without asking permission and placed one long hand against the open chest plate resting on the magnetic cradle. The braided filaments responded instantly, light traveling along the spinal lattice in a smooth, uninterrupted wave. 72 beats per minute, steady and strong. Her gaze shifted to the diagnostic panel. She did not touch it. This configuration is not Imperial standard, she said quietly. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. Ethan nodded once. The bracket was warped by 0.03 inches. Standard alignment was stressing the neural threads. I shaved it down and rerouted the conduit. It will hold. He expected security to enter at any second. He expected to be escorted out. Contract terminated, badge revoked. Instead, there was only the hum of the docking clamps and the faint circulation of climate control overhead, holding the bay at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. She circled the armor slowly, studying the seam where his polymer weave sealed the conduit. Her fingers traced the edge. This material is agricultural grade, she said. Yes, ma'am, he answered. Designed for long harvest cycles. It flexes better under vibration. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Not cold. Evaluating. The pulse within the armor did not falter. It almost sounded stronger, as if aware of her presence. She stopped in front of him. close enough that he could see faint silver patterns. Beneath her skin, like constellations just under the surface. "You altered royal property," she said. Her voice was calm, yet the air seemed to tighten around the words. Ethan met her eyes. "I stabilized a failing system." A beat passed. Then another. No one in the bay moved. Technicians along the far wall kept their heads lowered, pretending to calibrate tools that did not need calibrating. The figure before him studied his face as if searching for something unscripted. Fear, ambition, deceit. He offered none of it. Only the simple truth of a mechanic who could not ignore a broken thing. Finally, she reached for the chest plate and lifted it effortlessly, aligning it with the torso frame. The seals engaged with a soft magnetic thud. Internal systems synchronized, lights rippling outward in clean symmetry. The armor stood complete, balanced on its own support field. She did not look at the technicians. She looked at Ethan. "Walk with me," she said. It was not a request. The hangar doors parted ahead of them, revealing a corridor lined in polished alloy that reflected her silhouette in endless repetition. Ethan fell into step half a pace behind, boots sounding too loud against the floor. He still did not know her name, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The armor had not been breathing by accident, and neither had this moment. The corridor stretched nearly 300 feet, walls curved in seamless arcs that reflected light like still water. Ethan counted his steps without meaning to. 21. 22. The air smelled faintly metallic, filtered and precise. The tall figure beside him moved without wasted motion, each stride exact, controlled. Her armor, now fully sealed, emitted a low harmonic resonance that vibrated through the floor panels and into his boots. It was no longer struggling. It was synchronized. They passed beneath archways lined with vertical light columns glowing soft white, illuminating silver insignias etched into the walls. None of them meant anything to him, but he understood hierarchy when he saw it. This was not a maintenance wing. This was central command. At the end of the corridor, two massive doors parted without a sound. The chamber beyond was vast, easily 100 feet across, ceiling rising high enough to disappear into shadow. A circular platform dominated the center, surrounded by tiered stations where figures in similar alloy garments stood, waiting. Every head turned as she entered, and then, as one, they lowered. Not slightly, completely, knees to polished floor, spines bent in perfect symmetry. Ethan felt the shift in gravity before he understood the meaning. He did not kneel. He did not know he was supposed to. The harmonic hum of her armor quieted as she stepped onto the central platform. The lights above adjusted, focusing down in a controlled beam that traced the contours of her form. The chamber recognized her. The others did too. She removed her helmet with a single deliberate motion. Silver blue skin caught the light, constellations beneath the surface glowing faintly like distant stars. Violet eyes surveyed the room, then settled on Ethan standing alone at the base of the platform. The silence deepened, thick as pressure before a storm. "Rise," she commanded softly. The chamber obeyed. Dozens of figures stood, but none lifted their gaze fully. Ethan felt every eye measure him without looking directly. She turned slightly, enough that her voice carried across the room. "Who authorized the alteration of my armor core?" The words were calm, amplified not by volume, but by certainty. No one answered. Not because they did not know, because they did. Her gaze shifted downward, straight to him. The weight of it was not anger. It was expectation. Ethan swallowed once, the sound loud in his own ears. He stepped forward until he stood at the edge of the platform, boots echoing across alloy. "I did," he said clearly. The chamber seemed to inhale as one organism. He felt the distance between species, between power and contract labor, stretched like a wire ready to snap. She studied him in open view now, no concealment, no ambiguity. "You altered a design that has endured for centuries," she said. "Yes," he answered. It was failing. A pause. Measured. Then she spoke a name that did not need introduction. "I am Valeth." The word moved through the chamber like a current. "Queen." The realization settled over Ethan not as fear, but as clarity. He had placed his hands inside the armor of the most powerful being in this empire. He had adjusted her spine by 0.03 inches. And he had done it because it needed fixing. The pulse within the armor resonated once, steady and strong, echoing softly against the vast ceiling. She did not look away. For the first time, neither did he. No one spoke after she said her name. The silence was not empty. It was structured, like the interior of her armor, every filament aligned with purpose. Ethan stood at the edge of the platform, aware of the distance between his worn work boots and the polished alloy beneath her feet. The chamber lights adjusted again, narrowing slightly, as if focusing on the space between them. Valeth descended one step from the platform, not enough to equal their height, but enough to shift the geometry of the room. "You evaluated my core without authorization," she said. Her tone was even, neither sharp nor forgiving. Ethan felt the weight of 100 silent witnesses. "Yes," he answered. The neural threads were under strain. Another 48 hours, and the stress fracture would have propagated through the lattice. A faint murmur moved through the outer ring of officials, quickly suppressed. Valeth tilted her head a fraction, silver patterns beneath her skin shimmering as internal systems synchronized with her breathing. "Our engineers reported no critical instability," she said. "With respect," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. "They were reading surface metrics. The distortion was internal. 0.03 of an inch at the bracket. That is enough." The chamber seemed to tighten around the number. Precision was their language. She studied him again, this time not as a trespasser but as an instrument. "You altered the conduit pathway," she continued. "Agricultural polymer is not standard for royal armature. It flexes under sustained vibration," he said. "Your armor does not rest. It carries load continuously. Rigid seals would fail again." He did not add that he had felt the pulse weaken beneath his fingertips. He did not need to. The harmonic resonance within the armor sounded once, low and stable, echoing across the curved ceiling nearly 100 feet above them. Valeth lifted her hand slightly. Instantly, a translucent display formed in the air beside her, projecting layered schematics of the armor core. Lines of light traced his modifications in pale gold, contrasting with the original design in white. The difference was small, precise, intentional. She stepped closer until only 3 feet separated them. Up close, he could see faint temperature gradients along the edges of her armor where energy circulated. "Why did you not request clearance?" she asked. The question was quiet. Not for the chamber. For him. Ethan considered the truth and found it simple. "Because it was failing now," he said. "And I was there." The answer lingered. Around them, the officials remained motionless, their posture rigid as if carved from the same alloy as the walls. Valeth dismissed the projection with a subtle movement. The schematics dissolved into air. She circled him once, slow and measured, assessing without touch. He did not turn to follow her. He kept his gaze forward, aware of her presence like a shift in gravity. When she returned to face him, her expression had not changed, yet something beneath it had recalibrated. "In my empire," she said softly, "intervention without command is insubordination." Ethan nodded once. "On my world, ignoring a preventable failure is negligence." The words settled between them, not as defiance, but as contrast. For a moment, the chamber felt less like a throne room and more like a workshop, two systems comparing tolerances. The pulse within the armor continued, steady and unbroken. Valeth's violet eyes held his, searching not for submission, but for inconsistency. She found none. The silence that followed was no longer cold. It was evaluating something new. The chamber did not release its tension, but it shifted, like a structure recalculating load after a stress test. Valeth stepped back onto the central platform, not retreating, simply reclaiming elevation. Ethan remained where he stood, aware that every breath he took echoed faintly in the vast space. The harmonic resonance of her armor continued, steady as a metronome. She turned slightly toward the semicircle of officials surrounding them. "Display the last engagement diagnostics," she said. A translucent field ignited above the platform, lines of data cascading downward in pale columns. Temperature fluctuations, power distribution curves, microfracture probabilities. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. The distortion was there, subtle but undeniable, a deviation of 0.03 inches magnified across stress cycles. Valeth did not look at the data first. She looked at him. "Explain it," she said. The request was deliberate. Not to test him, to measure him. Ethan stepped closer to the projection, careful not to touch the light. "Here," he said, tracing the air just short of the lattice schematic. The bracket alignment forced the neural threads to compensate. Over time, that compensation becomes instability. Your engineers were correct that the exterior plating was intact, but the load transfer was uneven. The armor was fighting itself. A quiet ripple moved through the chamber. Not dissent, recognition. Valeth's gaze shifted to the highlighted section. The gold lines marking his modification glowed faintly brighter, as if responding to scrutiny. "And your solution?" she asked. "Reduce rigidity," he replied. "Allow controlled flex. Strength is not only resistance. It is adaptation." The words lingered in the air, more philosophy than mechanics, though he had not intended them that way. Valeth dismissed the data with a slight movement. The projection dissolved, leaving only the ambient white light from the ceiling. She descended the final step until they stood on level ground, no platform between them. The officials remained silent, their posture disciplined but no longer entirely rigid. "You speak of adaptation," she said quietly. "Your species is known for it." There was no praise in the statement, only fact. Ethan shrugged slightly. "We survive by adjusting." A faint change passed through her expression, subtle as the shift of a star behind cloud cover. She lifted one hand and placed it against the chest plate of her armor. The resonance deepened, filling the chamber with a low, stable tone that vibrated through the floor panels and into every stance. It was not a display of power. It was proof of function. "The armor responds," she said. "It has not stabilized so cleanly in many cycles." She let the statement settle, then turned to the assembly. "Intervention without command remains a breach of protocol," she declared, voice carrying to the farthest curve of the wall. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a single degree. Ethan did not move. He had expected this part. Valeth's eyes returned to him, searching again, deeper now, not for fear, but for motive. "Why?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Would a human risk consequence for a system not his own? The chamber waited for his answer. Ethan considered the question carefully, feeling the hum of the armor in his bones. "Because it was within reach," he said. "And because I could." No flourish. No apology. Just the simple geometry of proximity and ability. The silence that followed was no longer evaluative. It was reflective, as if the empire itself was recalibrating around a new variable it had not accounted for. The silence did not break. It stretched, thin and tinsel, like a cable under measured strain. Valeth remained still, her gaze fixed on Ethan as if recalculating not his words, but the framework behind them. Around them, the chamber lights dimmed by a fraction, shifting from bright white to a cooler hue, 70% intensity. The harmonic resonance of her armor continued, steady at 72 beats per minute, echoing softly through the alloy floor. She turned from him slowly and faced the assembly once more. "Strength is adaptation," she repeated, not as endorsement, but as analysis. Several officials exchanged subtle glances, their expressions controlled yet unsettled. An empire built on rigidity did not adjust easily. Valeth lifted her hand, and a new projection formed, not of schematics, but of historical performance data spanning decades. Armor integrity charts, load distribution graphs, marginal declines so gradual they had been dismissed as acceptable variants. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. Drift, not failure. "Yet, our doctrine favors endurance through resistance," she said. "Your modification favors endurance through flexibility." Her eyes shifted back to him. "These are not equivalent philosophies." Ethan did not step back. "No, they are not," he agreed. "But both are forms of strength." The chamber felt smaller somehow, though its ceiling still vanished into shadow nearly 100 feet above. Valeth descended from the platform completely now, closing the distance until only 2 feet separated them. The silver constellations beneath her skin pulsed faintly, synchronized with the steady hum of her armor. "If I allow deviation from standard design," she said quietly, so only he could hear clearly, "I signal that tradition can be questioned." Ethan considered that. He thought of factory floors back on Earth, of outdated manuals revised because someone dared to adjust a bracket by less than 1/10 of an inch. "If you do not allow it," he replied just as softly, "you risk losing systems that could have been saved." The words were not defiant. They were simple math. For a long moment, she studied him again, searching for ambition, for hidden agenda, For leverage. She found none. Only a mechanic who saw a flaw and corrected it. The projection behind her shifted automatically, recalculating projected armor longevity under the modified configuration. The line extended further now, a subtle but undeniable increase in operational stability. The officials saw it too. Valith let the data remain visible. She did not dismiss it this time. "You altered my armor without permission," she said aloud, voice carrying across the chamber. "Yet the result is measurable improvement." No one interrupted. No one challenged. The numbers hovered in silent agreement. She stepped back half a pace, creating space not of dominance, but of consideration. "In my empire, obedience preserves order," she continued. "But survival preserves existence." Her gaze returned to Ethan, and something in it had shifted again, not softer, but more precise. "You acted because you were within reach," she said. "And because you could." The harmonic resonance within the armor deepened slightly, as if responding to the truth of that statement. Valith inclined her head a fraction of an inch. Not a bow. Not yet. But acknowledgment. The chamber felt the shift immediately. Authority had not diminished. It had adapted. And for the first time since he entered, Ethan sensed that the Empire was no longer measuring him as a liability. It was measuring him as a variable worth keeping. The recalibration did not go unnoticed. Within seconds of Valith's subtle nod, a new projection ignited along the outer ring of the chamber, crimson indicators flashing across a sector map suspended 30 feet above the floor. The harmonic resonance of her armor shifted, rising half a tone as internal systems responded to incoming data. Ethan felt it before he understood it. A tremor in the floor panels. Not impact. Interference. One of the officials stepped forward, posture rigid. "Your Majesty, the outer defense grid is reporting phase drift along the eastern perimeter. Energy distribution is misaligned by 0.02%. The number sounded small. Ethan knew better. Small misalignments compounded. Valith did not turn toward the official immediately. Her eyes remained on Ethan for a fraction longer, as if measuring whether coincidence was chance or pattern. Then she faced the projection. The sector map expanded, revealing a network of orbital relays positioned thousands of miles above the planet's surface. One node flickered, its signal oscillating outside optimal tolerance. "Cause?" she asked. "Undetermined," came the reply. "The grid is compensating, but sustained drift will reduce efficiency." Ethan stepped closer to the projection without thinking, eyes scanning the waveform. The oscillation pattern was familiar, not identical to the armor's distortion, but related in principle. Stress under rigidity. A system attempting to maintain perfect alignment in a dynamic environment. "It is locking itself too tightly," he said quietly. Several heads turned toward him. Valith did not silence him. "Explain," she said. He pointed to the waveform. "The grid is designed for static balance. But orbital conditions shift. Microvariations in gravitational pull, solar flux. If the relays cannot flex, they overcorrect. That drift is the correction fighting itself." The official's expression hardened slightly. "Our grid has endured for centuries." Ethan nodded. "So had the bracket in your armor." The words hung in the air, bold not in tone, but in implication. Valith studied the oscillation again. The crimson indicator pulsed at steady intervals, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The chamber lights dimmed further as energy was redirected to compensate for the drift. The temperature dropped by 2 degrees Fahrenheit. "If left unchanged?" she asked. Ethan inhaled slowly. "Efficiency loss will increase. Eventually the grid will stabilize, but at reduced capacity. Or it will require shutdown for recalibration." A shutdown of a planetary defense grid was not a minor inconvenience. It was vulnerability. Valith's violet eyes reflected the flickering map, calculations moving behind them with controlled precision. "You propose flexibility," she said. "Not as theory. As option." "Yes," Ethan answered. "Introduce controlled variance into the relay alignment. Allow the system to absorb fluctuation instead of resisting it." One of the officials stepped forward again. Altering the grid architecture would require direct authorization from the throne. Silence followed that statement. Heavy. Expectant. Valith looked from the projection to Ethan once more. The harmonic resonance of her armor deepened, steady and unwavering despite the instability displayed above them. She had felt the difference in her own core. She had seen the data. Now the Empire itself stood at the same threshold her armor had faced hours earlier. Rigid endurance or adaptive strength. The crimson indicator pulsed again, brighter this time. Vailith's voice cut cleanly through the chamber. "Prepare a modification protocol," she said. Her gaze never left Ethan. "He will assist." The officials stiffened, but none objected. The decision was not impulsive. It was precise. As the projection recalibrated around new parameters, Ethan understood the weight of what had just shifted. He had not merely repaired armor. He had influenced doctrine. And in an empire built on resistance, that was the most dangerous adjustment of all. The chamber transformed within minutes. The sector map expanded to fill the entire domed ceiling, orbital relays glowing like a ring of distant stars positioned thousands of miles above the planet. The crimson drift indicator pulsed at steady intervals, now 0.03% and climbing. Ethan stood beside the central console, fingers hovering over a translucent interface that was not designed for human hands. The surface adjusted to his touch after a brief hesitation, translating measurements into units he recognized. Vailith remained at his side, her armor emitting a calm, even resonance that contrasted with the unstable waveform above. "You will guide the recalibration," she said, not loudly, yet the entire chamber heard. Several officials stiffened, but none interrupted. Ethan swallowed once and focused on the grid architecture. "We introduce controlled variants here," he said, highlighting a cluster of relay nodes. "Instead of forcing perfect alignment, allow a tolerance window of 0.05%. The system will flex with environmental shifts instead of resisting them." An official responded immediately. "Deviation invites inefficiency." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Unmanaged deviation does. Managed deviation creates resilience." Vailith watched the numbers cascade across the projection, her violet eyes reflecting shifting bands of light. The temperature in the chamber dropped another degree as more power was diverted to stabilize the drifting sector. The harmonic tone from her armor deepened subtly, as if anchoring the room. "Authorize trial adjustment," she commanded. The words carried weight not just of authority, but of risk. A ripple moved through the assembly as new parameters uploaded to the orbital network. For a moment, nothing changed. The crimson indicator pulsed again, brighter, testing the limits of the old design one final time. Then the waveform widened. Slightly, not collapsing, expanding. The oscillation smoothed from sharp spikes into rolling curves, like tension releasing from a tightened cable. 0.03% drift reduced to 0.01, then stabilized. The crimson faded to amber. A collective exhale moved through the chamber, quiet but unmistakable. Ethan stepped back from the interface, heart steady, not triumphant, just certain. Vailith did not look at the officials first. She looked at the ceiling where the relays now glowed in balanced symmetry, each node adjusting subtly rather than locking rigidly in place. "Report," she said. "Grid efficiency restored to full capacity." The official answered after a brief scan. "Structural stress reduced by 4% across the network." Vailith's gaze shifted to Ethan again, measuring the absence of pride in his posture. He did not raise his chin. He did not claim success. He simply watched the system. Hold. The harmonic resonance of her armor synchronized with the stabilized grid, two independent systems now operating on the same principle. Flexibility under load. She stepped forward into the center of the chamber, silver constellations beneath her skin glowing softly. "Let it be recorded," she declared, voice clear and unwavering, "that strength is not diminished by adaptation." Her eyes returned to Ethan, steady and unguarded. "It is refined by it." In that moment, the Empire did not feel rigid. It felt recalibrated. And the mechanic from Earth stood at the center of a change measured not in inches, but in doctrine. The chamber remained quiet long after the orbital grid stabilized. The crimson warnings were gone, replaced by a steady constellation of balanced light across the domed ceiling. Ethan stood where he had stepped back from the console, hands relaxed at his sides, grease still faint beneath his fingernails. The temperature slowly returned to baseline, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, climate systems easing back into equilibrium. Vailith did not move immediately. She watched the projection as if memorizing the new rhythm of her empire. The harmonic resonance of her armor aligned perfectly with the stabilized network above, two systems separated by thousands of miles now operating on the same principle. Flexibility without collapse. Control without rigidity. Around them, the officials shifted subtly, posture no longer strained but recalculated. Doctrine had not shattered. It had adjusted. Valeth turned at last. She descended the platform with unhurried precision until she stood directly before Ethan once more. There were no projections now. No data streams. Only reflected light across polished alloy and silver-blue skin illuminated by the ceiling's glow. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence felt different than before. Not evaluative. Not tense. It felt earned. "You altered my armor," she said quietly. "You altered my grid." Her violet eyes held his, not searching for weakness, but acknowledging impact. Ethan did not shift his stance. "I adjusted what was within reach," he replied. The faintest change touched her expression, almost imperceptible, like the softening of a star at dawn. Slowly, deliberately, Valeth placed her hand over the center of her chest plate, where the spinal lattice lay beneath layered alloy and polymer weave. The harmonic tone deepened once, strong and steady. Then, in full view of her counsel, she inclined her head toward him. Not a ceremonial gesture, not political theater. A precise angle of respect measured in degrees rather than emotion. The chamber inhaled as one. No one had seen her bow. Not to force. Not to title. Not to fear. She straightened and addressed the assembly. "Let it be recorded that adaptation strengthens sovereignty," she said, "and that insight may arise from any station." Her gaze returned to Ethan. "You will remain." It was not a command bound by threat. It was an invitation shaped by recognition. The lights above dimmed slightly as the sector map dissolved into a calm field of stars. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle, not heavy, but grounding. He had arrived as contract labor. He stood now as a variable the Empire could not ignore. Valeth turned toward the vast windows at the far end of the chamber, where space stretched silent and endless beyond reinforced glass. For a second, her reflection aligned with his in the transparent surface, two silhouettes side by side against the stars. The armor did not breathe alone anymore. Neither did the Empire. And in a galaxy built on resistance, a single measured adjustment had become the quiet proof that humanity did not conquer through power. It endured through understanding.